afternoon, everyone. We will make a start. I think there's a few more people to join us, but again, we've only got a half hour, so it'll be fun-packed as always. So I just really want to welcome you to the next in the series of our PPMA webinars. My name is Jill Parker. I'm a Vice President for the PPMA, but also in my day job, I'm Assistant Director for HR Communications at Doncaster Council. So just before we start, there's just a little bit of housekeeping. If you can keep yourselves on mute, unless you've got a question you want to ask, that would be great. Please do use the chat facility, because again, if there's any questions you want to raise or observations, are very helpful for the group and obviously for our speaker today. The session is going to be recorded. So again, it's really just for the use for the speakers, but also it'd be helpful if you can keep your cameras on. It is good for the speakers so they know they are actually speaking to wonderful colleagues out there in the audience. And as I've said, if you've got any questions, do raise your hand if you want to pick those up, and obviously we'll pick those where we can, and if not, we will try and keep some time at the end so you can actually raise and we can give some responses. If we do run out of time, of course, anything you do put in the chat that you want a response to, we will follow that up after this session. Is that okay with everybody? So it actually just gives me a huge amount of pleasure to be able to host and welcome this session today, having done quite a lot of work and knowing the colleagues that are on the group from Real World Group. Today we are joined by Juliette Metcalf, who's actually going to run the session for us today. And this is really to cover around how leaders most effectively lead hybrid teams. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Juliette.
Thank you very much, Jill, and I'm thrilled to be here today. And hello to everybody else that I haven't said hello to that I know personally. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can see my slides. Okay, so can you see the actual, can someone say me, you see the PowerPoint, not the PowerPoint notes? Fab, thank you very much. So yeah, so now not all of you, I think, were in the previous session. This is sort of like a follow-on from the session I did in July, where I started. So basically the context is I'm an occupational psychologist and I run Real World Group, but many of you know Real World Group and our sort of expertise in leadership and so on. But basically, I've been doing a doctorate looking at effective leadership of hybrid teams. And in the first webinar in July, what I talked about was the systematic literature review that I'd undertaken. So all the research that's already out there, which is actually not very much. But anyway, so I talked about that. And then I said I'd come back and share some of my findings. Now, I didn't want to let people down with these dates being in diaries, but the analysis of the data, even the data collection, isn't quite finished. But what's interesting is we're already seeing loads of, I'm already seeing loads of strong themes in what people have been saying about what works and what doesn't work. And so there's lots of things that I think you'll find really interesting about what people have said so far. So, and I'd like to, if possible, end the session by inviting you to participate in the next stage of the research too, which is a big quantitative piece of research. So this is the primary research. So that's just a note in terms of this is not the systematic literature review anymore. This is actual new research that's been gathered. So first of all, a massive thank you to everyone that helped to find new participants and to put their organisations forward. I can't name organisations because I'm trying to protect anonymity, but thank you so much. The focus groups that I've worked with and analysed so far have been conducted in 6 different organisations. They are across sectors, but they are mostly within local government. And within those 6 organisations, there are multiple teams, there are a huge variety of leadership experiences and different leaders being talked about. And that's not only just because, well, the ethics people that review our sort of our proposals for the research, but they insisted that I can't have connected teams. So that meant that in these large organisations, there were quite a variety of different people and different perspectives and different kind of disciplines and so on. And also many people, of course, as we know, have been working hybrid for many years. So many people talked about historical experiences as opposed to current experiences. Now, where's my clock? I must keep an eye on the time. Okay, So I'm going to be running a couple more open sector focus groups that I'll advertise on LinkedIn. But what I'm going to show is that I said that the key themes so far. So I think there are I thought you'd be interested in 5 really strong themes that are already emerging from the research from multiple participants and multiple focus groups. And I'm going to present them in no particular order. So don't be taking it as this is the first most important and so on. It's in no particular order. So the first one, this one won't surprise you, of course, is about the importance of managing by outputs. So this is something that we know people have been frustrated about in-person teams, of course, for many, many years too. What people talked about here specifically was about, of course, the critical importance of managers managing by outputs rather than by being visibly able to see the work or by being overly involved in the work or and it was not only when people, not only related to people leading managers wanting people to be in the office so they could physically see them, but also related to how much they were interfering with their work when they were working remotely. The most effective leaders then, so they're managed by output, they find a way of doing it. Sometimes in some jobs, of course, it's really easy, and some jobs it's more complex, but they've got to find a way of doing it is the big message that we're getting. And those leaders that were regarded as more effective were more relaxed about people's hours of working. And that's despite the fact that they can monitor much more easily when they look at things like, are people online on the online system? Are they, through things like Teams and so on, of course, you can see activity. And they, connected to that, they allow flexibility in people's day-to-day work and day-to-day agendas. So, for example, people can put their washing on without the manager wondering why they've been away from their desk, or they might go for a walk at lunchtime, or they might go and pick up their kids from sports club and make up for that time later on, or whatever it is. But that was really felt to be really, really important. And it was felt as if, if people aren't treated as adults, then what they will get is they will get, of course, childlike behaviors, because of course we rebel, don't we, when people treat us like children. But they also related to this issue of managing by outputs, and this flexibility was about they try to allow people to make their own decisions and their own choices about how much they will be in the office. Now, I'll come on to how that needs to be agreed at a team level too, but it was also about, trying to create flexibility. How can I help this person to flex to what their particular job needs, to what their team needs, and to what the organization needs, which relates to the next key theme, is around trying to ensure fairness in all directions. And what I mean by that was that the most effective leaders were ones that not only tried to ensure that the team members were fair to each other, as I'll sort of expand on, but that they were also fair to the manager in terms of what kind of work was being done and the quality of work, but also that there was a good win-win balance between the needs of the individuals and the needs of the organization. So trying to create fairness in all directions. So, for example, being firm about people coming in. This is obviously one of the, well, not obviously, but what I'm sure your experience told, what my experience tells me, and also what people talked about a lot in the research, was it was really important to be firm about people coming in and not allowing people to, take the mickey about, because they've got used to a certain way of working, or they've got, new dependencies, whether they are children or animals, that actually there was, if they needed to be in, they were in, or if they moved away further, but actually they were firm. And as you probably know, that one of the things that supports this is building managers' confidence through creating guidelines, standards of behavior at an organizational level, at a team level, that managers can fall back on, so they don't have to feel overly, challenged or unconfident about having those conversations. And then also being firm about fairness. So, again, related often in people's examples to things like, new dependencies or ways that people have got used to working. Said, well, when you were in an in-person team, if you had a dog, you had to put your dog into doggy daycare. People talked about, it's not fair if people have got small children and they don't get childcare. They allow a toddler to run around when they should be formally working. So things like that. And again, backed up by guidelines and support, so that everybody feels like, and this of course relates to being fair to the organization. People talked about the importance of, you're being paid for a job, so making sure that people are actually doing that job rather than, taking advantage because of what was, the situation that we're still emerging from regarding COVID. Also, related to fairness was the issue of making sure that the managers are, or the leaders are just as focused on people that they don't see as often as those that they do. So there were people talked about anxiety about, if I'm not in the office where my manager is, will I miss out on development opportunities? Will other people be favoured? So the best leaders were ones that made sure that they were inclusive in how they gave their time, how they gave opportunities and so on, with those who are physically there more often and those that were less often. I mean, sometimes it's just more convenient, isn't it, for people to come into the office? Oh, that's what people were saying anyway. And, and making sure that that's still fair. And then also related to fairness, people talked about managers going out of their way to include them in things, whether that's information about what's happening in the wider organization, so people feel connected to the organization, or inviting them to take part in large-scale events or meetings. The next theme was about promoting a bespoke approach to office presence. This again was these are all very strong themes. So the kind of things that people talked about in relation to promoting a bespoke approach to office presence was the real importance of devolving decisions about, how much people need to be in the office or not, that to a team level. So again, you might have key organizational guidelines, but as far as possible, you delegate that responsibility to teams to decide what works, because of course, it differs, as people talked about, hugely by what kind of work that you do, how many people are in the team, what kind of ways that they work together and don't work together, what kind of technology they've got, so people talked about things like, when it was working really well, it was when their manager encouraged them to perhaps list those things that they do as a team and then agreeing. So saying, well, let's agree that by default they can all be done at home, but which can't, or which cannot be done remotely. Another really big theme was about the importance of leaders coordinating people being in the office, so not leaving it up to chance. And there were a number of reasons why people wanted this. One of them was because, related to sort of well-being, and that, of course, as you probably know from your organizations, many people people talked about that a factor in well-being that they either felt personally was missing, or that they had observed as HR or OD practitioners, was that people were missing that human connection. They were missing the company. It didn't make them feel good that when they went into the office, there were just kind of other people sort of dispersed from different teams, not the team that they were used to, for example. So the importance of coordinating team time, but also, of course, coordinating team time so that people can learn together and, generate ideas together. So very much about, the importance of all the different ways that face-to-face interaction can really enhance team performance. So, also not just, people talking about the importance of generating ideas together and stuff, but also, like, they talked about how if you're sort of discussing tasks and joint objectives, how much easier it is, or if you're being delegated to, people talked about how much easier it is when you can ask questions in the moment rather than being sent a task by email, say, So of course, some of these things could work remotely if they were done better, but when people talked about the coordination of people being in the office, it was typically because of the quality of work that can happen as a result, and team coordination. And then it was also about getting the right balance between asking people to be back in the office and what was promised to them. So a number of people talked about, that it's all very well organizations, wanting people to come back in, but they've got to be mindful of what they promised when people were recruited, and the fact that they feel concerned, many people feel concerned that talent will go elsewhere if other organizations are offering more flexibility. And then, of course, the other aspect of it was, what are the talent needs of an organization? So if you have jobs that are particularly suited to remote working, and you might be in a part of the country where you're not able to recruit enough of those people, or the outstanding people are somewhere else, there's got to be a balance between that and allowing organizations, of course, to benefit from all the talent available. And also there was a thing about when I'm in, when I'm in the office, and you need my manager to help me make it as productive as possible. So managers avoiding cancelling meetings at the last minute, particularly people might have already been en route, for example, to the meeting, which is, a frustration that people talked about in a variety of different focus groups, or they talked about, about it sort of links to making sure that people turn up too. So not only the leader or the manager making sure that they're available for, when people are in the office, or helping to coordinate people's time in the office, but also it links back to the issue of holding to account and making sure that other people aren't making excuses for not being in, because often people gave examples of, really not much requirement, a couple of days every 6 months or something, that some people were resistant to, so they felt very frustrated by that. The next theme was about trying to ensure that work is efficient. So again, a number of different themes under that. One of them is about making sure that meetings are always prepared and inclusive, because they felt that it was kind of like, there was more of people generally, I'm not sure if it was more of an expectation that meetings were more efficient, or if it was about the fact that, it's more visible whether a meeting is efficient or not. I'm not sure, but what it did relate to was making sure that meetings stay on track and are engaging, rather than what should we talk about today, or what's on the agenda, or and particularly when it came to formal meetings, making sure they were really well prepared, so that people stayed engaged rather than switching their cameras off and not continuing to engage. But also they found that people talked about when meetings were run really well online, they felt that it could increase participation compared to in-person meetings, when perhaps people who are more introverted or more shy, or less perhaps engaged in a particular area, they felt, ironically, I think, that in person people might be less engaged than they might be in an interactive meeting online. But of course that relies on it being done well, and also people talked about things like making sure that individuals don't dominate. Of course, we're going to be really careful about software that only shows the speaker and so on. Also talked about encouraging people to take breaks between meetings. Of course, people talked about how frustrating it can be when there's back-to-back meetings. So when managers encourage people to take breaks between meetings, and they have a culture where you're not allowed to just slam meetings together, especially online, because they felt that that it can be particularly dominating, and encouraging you to be in the right meetings, not all meetings. So being really encouraging a real careful culture in the teams around, do we really need everybody to be at this meeting? We've got to get the balance between being inclusive and wasting people's time, or not being as efficient as we might be. Especially they felt this might be an issue online. And related to this, the critical importance of line managers providing technology needed, and also knowing how to use it themselves and making the most of it. So they said, people talked about how disastrous it can be if the tech goes wrong because the person chairing the meeting doesn't know how to use it. And then the other final thing I was going to talk to you about was about the importance of proactively building connections with individual team members. So, and this was, this could easily have been the first thing. Remember, these are not in any order. This is another really strong theme. The importance of the best leaders in hybrid teams were ones who had built up a good relationship with people. Again, it's one of those ways in which things aren't hugely different to in-person teams, and they hadn't necessarily built up this personal relationship where people knew each other or were comfortable in their one-to-ones with their leader, or the manager through, right, so I'm, Juliette, and I've got, this family, and I live in, having a formal kind of sit down, but just over time, these conversations developing, because people, we're happy to have that, that sort of connection with their real selves and their sort of wider life. And lots of stuff around making sure that they're available when needed. People talked about hybrid working can work really, really well and can be much more accessible than in-person meetings in terms of getting to speak to people and getting time with people, because it's so much easier. But it only, of course, only works if people are willing to make themselves accessible. When line managers, if you say I've got an issue, can we grab 5 minutes, they make sure that they can, and they connect, for a one-to-one. And then people talked about strategies around, open diaries within teams, obviously within the guidelines that I talked about just now, and managers using the right communications approaches, not just email, because that, of course, is kind of like the least 3D way of speaking, communication, sorry, for want of a better phraseology. And then related, the best line managers regularly reached out, so people might have many more meetings with the line manager, many more one-to-ones than they had in person, they often talked about, and that really helped to keep things flowing and really helped to do that. And so it was the line manager initiating those one-to-ones as well. And then of course a really big theme, of course, as well, was around proactively contacting people to ensure that they're not overloaded, that they are well, and so on. And there are many more themes around, for example, line managers role modeling the right behaviors. These are more general themes, respecting and helping to protect people's personal space, and helping the team to bond, and others, but that'll be for another time, I'm afraid. So I'm going to move on to now. I'll stop sharing, and I wondered, I hope you found that really interesting and useful, and I'd love any questions that you've got.
Sure, we should have some questions for Juliette. I think this is something that we're all facing in our workplaces. Just one for myself, I thought it was quite interesting around trying not to sort of be too prescriptive about how teams can work. So I think there's a challenge there between, I think, the environment, the accommodation available, some views that people need to be in or not to be in. I just don't know whether some of that came out in your sort of research, Juliette.
Yeah, lots of that, and about how it will always be a careful balance as well. There's unfortunately no formula that's going to fit everyone and every team and every organization by a long way. And then I think that when we think about practical so what, it's about really developing leaders' confidence, and really providing them with, might even be templates of conversations, or at least real clarity about what the non-negotiables are for an organization or a team to support them in reality. So yeah, loads of that. So Teresa's asked if the research showed that most organizations go for a set number of days in the office. No, it didn't, but from memory, the most common was 2 to 3 days. But like I said, for some people, it was like we only needed them in a couple of days every 6 months, and they couldn't even bring themselves to do that. That was also a theme for some organizations, but for most people, they were starting to move formally back to 2 to 3 days a week. It really depended on the nature of the sector.
So I just wondered, Juliette, because it struck me as I was as you were going through those, that a lot of the things would translate to both working in the office and working remotely. It's that mixture, isn't it? I just wondered, were there any kind of were there any hopes and optimism that some of the better habits that maybe had been developed over COVID would continue once everybody was started to get back into the office?
I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Hilary. You know, and I've been saying from the beginning that hybrid leadership is leadership on steroids. You've got to do what you've got to do well in a in-person team, but you've got to go out of your way to do it, because it's more, it can be more challenging. Of course, you might have already had a hybrid team, but basically, I think that what people who I don't know if this completely answers your question, but people who were already leading hybrid teams or working in hybrid teams before COVID felt that had really helped to make it much more effective. So hybrid working seems to have become more effective as a result of the things that have come in and that have become more common. But, you know, I mean, I can't answer that question specifically, but I hope so, because like I said, if people are starting to be in the office 2 to 3 days and they are adopting these things, then it should be that in-person leadership gets better too, in hopes. So there's a comment there from Andy about evolving into hybrid working from home without giving it enough thought. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I hope we never revert back to presenteeism. I don't think we can after such an enormous shock. You know, people talked about, I mean, obviously organizations differ in how much they particularly pay attention to, dare I say, care, or whether they are being fair to their people in all these different ways. But people talked about, you know, we really should be thinking about rewarding people's flexibility. They were in, they were out, they were, you know, and now they're sort of in between. You know, we need to respect that fact that they've been flexible for us and be flexible in return. And Deborah said, data suggests that there is an unconscious bias to promotion in hybrid working. Do you think this will change as workplaces adapt to a more formal working from home pattern as normal? I don't know, Deborah. I think this is one of my worries about hybrid working. You know, because it is so easy to, you know, even before, of course, in in-person teams, it's always been so easy to forget the people that aren't right there in front of you, you know, or that you don't have the best relationship with. That's, of course, how unconscious bias and halo and horns effects work. So it really does concern me. And I think that's an area where we've really got to pay attention, really up our game in terms of making sure that we don't unconsciously discriminate against people who aren't physically right in front of us and that are different from us, and all the other things that we already know about you know, I've forgotten the word I'm looking for, but the effect of similarity. And another comment there from Kim about a hybrid model has shown a positive impact on psychological well-being. Yes. So I need to stop, don't I, Jill?
I was just going to allow that for further question, and if there's anything else you want to finish off with, Juliette, I've just got a couple of minutes.
Is there any other questions from anybody?
No. If there is, obviously you can follow those up, as we've said, maybe things that you think of after the session. And as I said, we do record this and it will be shared at a later stage, so you can pick up again if anything that you've missed. Any final comments from you, Juliette, before I just wrap up?
No, I just wanted to say, you know, I hope that it was useful and practical. I appreciate it was very a real quick tour through things. But of course, we'll produce articles and we'll produce, you know, materials that people can use, and hopefully people will find them really useful in their organisations. And thank you so much for coming, everybody.
Thank you very much, Juliette, for your time. It's been a really interesting session. Just one last thing for me, we have got a series of these really helpful webinars, and we've got a further one on the 4th of November. So please watch out for the notifications. And thank you very much, everyone, for partaking. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jill.